Thank you. Good morning. It's my honor and privilege to deliver the 2026 Richard Schneider Lecture, where I will talk about our 30-year journey from molecules to mind. As a disclosure, we have received a large foundational grant for aligning research to impact autism, as well as I serve as the medical director for biohybrid devices in Science Corporation. So my journey started 30 years ago with the collection of the first DNA sample to study cavernous malformations and aneurysms, a journey that still continues, and I'll show you some examples what we have been able to achieve. First, we have cloned the 3 cavernous malformation genes, understanding biology of the disease, and as you know, therapeutic trials are ongoing in cavernous malformations. Next was a more difficult problem of intracranial aneurysms, and throughout the years we have used different genomic approaches to understand the molecular basis of aneurysms, ranging from identification of common variants, as well as in Mendelian forms of aneurysms, rare variants, which turn out to be more difficult. Of course, from now genetics, we are moving to understanding the cellular changes. What are shown here are some samples from intracranial aneurysm patients and ruptured aneurysms. Using single-cell technologies, proteomics and transcriptomics, now enable us to understand really the mechanisms such that we are applying them to model systems, either using vascular organoids or model systems to come up with therapies. And I would suggest that this will come at least for some forms of aneurysms in the near future. Similarly, for brain tumors, our work has focused on meningiomas, identifying the first somatic mutations, driver mutations in meningiomas, other than NF2, which then we continue to identify many other driver gene mutations, identifying molecular subtypes. We continue to focus on genomic changes, as I believe these are the really driver events, rather than some downstream elements that are more useful, such as methylation for classifying these meningiomas. We also started some work to understand how low-grade IDH1 mutant gliomas transform into malignant GBM, and this work is still ongoing. And using these, of course, what's most important for us is to translate that into the care of our patients in meningiomas in large data sets. As I mentioned, we have identified distinct molecular subgroups. Only NF2 was now known. You can see the complexity of the chart now, but all of these different driver mutations taught something to us about the pathogenesis of meningiomas. And most importantly, these do correlate with patient outcomes, prognosis, and recurrence. And looking at an MRI scan of a patient, we can now, with great certainty, decide what the driver mutation is. And these, again, correlate with the patient outcomes. Of course, from genomics, we and other groups are moving to cellular deconvolution, using, again, single-cell technologies, spatial technologies, and creating these atlases that are going to be fundamentally important in coming up with therapies for these disorders. Another area that we have focused on are the single gene disorders that lead to malformations of cortical development. You can see a severe disorder here of microlissencephaly due to a single gene mutation that we identified. At the time, we used exome sequencing for the first time to understand the molecular basis of this disease. It was one of the top 10 breakthroughs according to Science magazine, and we continue to build on these. And I think this is a good journey, skipping many steps in between. 15 years later, now we can actually have a pharmacological treatment, at least idea, for treating these microlissencephalies, extreme disorders of cortical development. Turns out that they share a common mechanism of decreased mTOR signaling, suggesting that the pharmacological activation of mTOR signaling during critical phases of fetal development might reverse these malformations. At Yale, in neurogenetics, we have focused the spectrum. My lab mainly focused on of these structural malformations, whereas Dr. Matt State's lab has focused on functional and synapticity disorders, such as representative of autism. And I was proud to be a member of this group led by Matt that have identified the genomic basis of autism that turns out to be due to de novo mutations. And these are really complex, and I think Tolstoy really stated it very well a century ago, saying every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. As we were considering different ways, of course, how to untangle this complexity, luckily AI came, and using these new modern approaches, now we are moving from genetics to multimodal digital twins, where we integrate all available data for a person into a personalized model. This includes all imaging, electrophysiology, and clinical data, such that we can create individual multimodal maps of a person's brain architecture. This is important because we want to identify the circuits that are altered for the individual and create disease vulnerabilities such that we can use modern neuromodulation technologies to modulate them. But this is not enough, having a single digital twin. The bigger ambitious aim is to create a brain foundation model, which will serve as a large reference model, as, for example, we have created in brain tumors and vascular malformations. This will include retrospective clinical data sets, and will create a shared representational space where neural signals will be linked to semantic meaning, and we have started doing this. I'll show you some examples of that. And once trained, the foundation model can be personalized using the non-invasive data, using all the modalities that we discussed. And we first started using this approach to treat comorbidities associated with autism. We were lucky to have received a large foundational grant to aim to translate these neurotechnologies to clinical impact. And this is for neurosensing and neuromodulation. 3 centers at Yale, at UCSF, led by Eddie Chang, and at Stanford, led by Carl Deiseroth, have been funded. And we are looking to combine our imagination and advanced research to impact these patients. And as I mentioned, I'll show you some of the initial examples. Here, this is for the decoding of brain activity, a neurotypical individual watching videos. And there's 1,400 videos, both in training and testing, and where we record the EEG and encode both the video stream as well as EEG into semantic representations, and using a large language model as shown here in the shared latent space to align these. And again, it's important to emphasize that here the training and the testing sets are the same, but what we can recreate is on the left are the videos that the person is watching. What I'm going to show on the right is just using EEG, what we can reconstruct. And you can see that they mostly resemble each other. But again, these are the same sets. So if you show a video that the person has never watched, we will not get these images. So the question is, can we do that? Can we show, for example, a picture that the person has never seen and then deconstruct the image? The answer is yes. This is now an fMRI-based study. Very large scene data set of 30,000. We are training the approach with 20,000 images. For example, image is a zebrafish that the person has never seen before. We have the MRI activity. We have a modern AI algorithm based on coder, decoder, and transformers called InnerSight. And the question is, this image that the person has never seen, can we just use the fMRI and reconstruct the image? The answer is yes. And this is the image that we can come up with, which is fairly similar to the ground truth. Of course, when you have the image, it's easy to translate that to language, and which again matches the ground truth, the description that the subject has never seen. So reading is the first step, and we continue to create large data sets and improving our algorithms to achieve this. But the next one is, of course, to writing the brain or to modulate the brain, as we've seen beautiful examples on how to do that. This requires engineering industrial collaborations, in my opinion, and the solution that we have focused on is to work on the biohybrid brain-computer interface devices. This is from Science Corporation, where they're developing this BCI device, which is flat surface, where neurons actually grow on the computer chip. Neurons are optogenetically modified such that they ultimately form synapses in the cortex. The blue ones are the neurons growing on the chip, answering the cortex, shown in pink there. And there are studies now to show that they are actually, at least in model organisms, are forming functional synapses. And they are optogenetically modified, meaning that those neurons can be activated just using light, as seen here. So in initial experiments, the pink here is the progenitor human cortical neurons differentiated from induced pluripotent stem cells. You can see the mouse brain. And looking deep, the pink neurons or axons are actually reaching into the depths of the brain, suggesting that this is a highly effective method and can achieve, at least in rodents, a whole brain engraftment. So overall, the human genetics have really revealed the biological origins of many brain disorders, as I've tried to show some examples really quickly, and created translational paths that now we are trying novel therapeutic approaches to these disorders. This includes gene therapies, and we focus on novel approaches to gene therapy and have received large NIH grants, and these should be coming to clinical trials next year. In other disorders, molecular genetics and biology continue to provide the early fundamental mechanistic insight, and imaging and physiology reveal the structure of individual circuits, and we have more and more sophisticated imaging technologies, of course. AI made a huge difference, helping us to decode these complex multimodal signals and align them. And engineering industrial collaborations created the devices, creating the devices that allow us as neurosurgeons to interact with the nervous system. So I would suggest that it's an incredibly exciting time in neurosurgery because we bring these elements to our patients and the clinical intervention, not only to restore lost neurological function, but also help developing the function in neurodevelopmental disorders. So, of course, there's many people to thank, including my wife, Jen, and Aydin, who are in the audience. Jen has been supporting for 2 decades, Aydin 1 decade. So we're about to turn 11, and without them, this would not have been possible. So, again, thank you very much for your attention.